I don't think there's many businesses out there that can't operate without power. And so if we identify we can't operate without power, then we need to determine, what are our critical loads that we need to protect at all costs. This may be critical equipment, safety measures, office, emergency lighting, all these sort of critical measures such that we can either continue to operate or at least keep people safe. And so then once we've determined that, systematically for all of our businesses today, we need to have these resilience plans and strategies. Dan, Happy New Year. Welcome back. I did not think coming into this year that we'd be sat here today talking about this topic. Spent Christmas in Liverpool, England. It was pouring rain. It was miserable weather. It was snowing. And I've returned to pretty apocalyptic conditions, which is shocking and scary. And a massive shout out to our fellow Californians who are suffering right now. But here we are recording early January. We're 48 hours into the wildfires here in California. 2,000 structures so far have been burned, 130,000 people evacuated, and as we speak, 400,000 people without power, which is obviously very close to our own missions. And it's already estimated that the economic loss of this is going to be in excess of $50 billion. And so we'd like to jump into that topic today because climate adaptation and weather pattern changes are impacting all of us. And we can no longer accept the status quo and accept that the infrastructure that is delivered for us in the past is going to continue to deliver for us in the future, especially under these conditions. And I know, Dan, when we first met, this was one of your big whys and your mission for getting into this space in the first place, growing up in Northern California and seeing the impacts firsthand. So we'd love for you to just share with our audience why this is so close to home for you.
Certainly. Well, Happy New Year to you as well, and Happy New Year to our listeners. And yeah, this is the core of my why and helping drive the energy transition, not just in driving a lower carbon economy, but also in allowing individuals and businesses to thrive, and why decentralized energy systems and distributed energy systems are so core to what I'm passionate about. I grew up in Mendocino County, about 100 miles north of San Francisco, a very wildfire-stricken area. You can look up fires like the Mendocino Complex fires, some of the largest wildfires ever to happen, certainly in the U.S., if not the world. And so this was always something that was top of mind for me. And then fast forward, 2017, my aunt and uncle directly impacted by the 2017 Sonoma County fires. Luckily, their house was saved, but all other structures on their property were burned. They were displaced from their house for over 6 months due to smoke damage. And so that was just another stark reminder of the impacts of these. And then driver for us recording this episode today, again, like you said, Gareth, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what that actually means and what utilities are doing and how it impacts businesses.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. I think the reality is, unfortunately, we shouldn't be surprised by these events anymore. Like, these are happening annually, multiple times a year. And I think what we are extremely passionate about is these shouldn't be weather-related disasters anymore. These should be weather-related events that we are adequately prepared for. And today we are not prepared for it. And so as a result, they turn into disasters, which we're then trying to manage and mitigate in real time. So we need to proactively get ahead of that. One way that we're seeing utilities trying to do that is, when weather comes through, it destroys the transmission lines, it impacts substations, transformers, and it really knocks out these very linear and long pieces of infrastructure that are extremely vulnerable. And so as a result, utilities are turning to, well, in the event of a weather-related event, we're going to proactively shut the power down, which then impacts our personal lives, our businesses through these power safety shutoff events. And so that's not also acceptable. So to try and mitigate against that, utilities are going through this grid hardening effort. And a big part of that is to try and underground infrastructure, especially transmission and distribution infrastructure. But this is actually extremely costly. And I'll just read out some stats for you here, Dan. In California, the California Public Utility Commission is talking about how do we underground more and more of this infrastructure. Today, there are 25,000 miles of transmission lines. There are 240,000 miles of distribution lines. And 147,000 of them are overhead, so above ground, and are vulnerable. The average cost of undergrounding distribution infrastructure is $3.8 million a mile. And in order for us to underground all of this infrastructure, both in terms of transmission and distribution, we're looking at a cost of in excess of $204 billion, assuming an average cost of $6 million per mile for transmission lines. So these are unacceptable costs to do business. And the only way that these upgrades are paid for is by passing the costs onto ratepayers, people who consume the power. And I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions in the market today is people are turning around and saying that energy costs are going up because we're trying to put more renewables on the grid. We're trying to invest in batteries. But there was a really interesting study recently done by Stanford by a professor called Mark Jacobson. And he actually researched this quite intensely. And he found that without renewables, prices in California would have been 50% higher in terms of the spot price of energy because they managed to offset the very volatile price of gas. But what they also found was the cost escalations that we're all experiencing and businesses that we serve are experiencing are largely as a result of trying to upgrade old, aging transmission and distribution infrastructure and then hardening it for these events that we've been talking about. And so when we see these bill rises, we should not just automatically, because of public perception, blame the energy transition. We need to be blaming the fact that we are now knee-jerk reacting to something that we should have been preparing for years ahead. And, we know that a big solution to this is more distributed assets and spreading the risk and making sure that every individual household and business can generate and store their own power and then mitigate these issues.
Yeah. And this is not isolated to California. We're seeing this in a variety of other places as well. Most recently, Western North Carolina, so the Asheville area of North Carolina, that was massively impacted by Hurricane Helene. There were folks without power for multiple weeks there. And prior to that, so Duke Energy, which is looking at how they can make their grid more resilient as part of their rate case. And in the rate case is how they can increase rates to their ratepayers, to their Public Utility Commission. A spokesperson at Duke Energy said that the proposed investments related to grid hardening would not only increase service to customers, but also decrease outages and shorten restoration times for their customers. And then went on to quote, say, this rate request will help us continue to provide that reliable service that our customers demand and deserve, while also making sure that we have an eye on the future. She went on to say, so we will be monitoring very closely to see some of the feedback from our customers. But overall at Duke Energy, we have an immense amount of reasonability to provide reliable power 24/7. Now, that is a utility that is managing the historic centralized infrastructure. Now, luckily, we are also starting to see utilities try to help support their clients deploy distributed energy systems. And I think as we talk about these grid hardening measures, look, they're going to be necessary. The grid's going to continue to be necessary as we move forward into the future.
Yep.
But a lot of these are Band-Aids over the actual core problem. And decentralized infrastructure or distributed energy systems that where you're generating and storing electricity at the point at which it's used is the real long-term solution. It's not the Band-Aid. It's actually the solution to be able to ensure that you can ride through these events. Now, is it going to be perfect? Certainly not. But we're going to be less reliant and less vulnerable to these events. And so, Gareth, what are some of the ways that businesses can adapt and be prepared for these changing weather patterns and the changing climate?
Yeah, I think we'll talk about this on our 2025 predictions in a bit more detail. But I think energy sovereignty is going to be a theme of the year. especially for that energy reliability piece. And we're seeing for business leaders, on-site energy almost used to be a luxury, and now it's a necessity. And more businesses are realizing that. And just doing some research, this was from an IT outage perspective, but it's absolutely parallel to energy, because if an organization goes offline, the impacts are huge. And so in their survey, 98% of organizations claimed that an hour of downtime cost them in excess of $100,000. For manufacturing, on average, it's $260,000 an hour. And so you can imagine now we're 2 days into this California event. That's a huge amount of impact to the business that has been knocked out. And so we know that through assessing our operations and determining what our critical loads are, whether we can, first of all, we need to know, can we operate through an outage? Do we need energy? I don't think there's many businesses out there that can't operate without power. And so if we've identified we can't operate without power, then we need to determine, what are our critical loads that we need to protect at all costs? This may be critical equipment, safety measures, office, emergency lighting, all these sort of critical measures such that we can either continue to operate or at least keep people safe. And so then once we've determined that, I think systematically for all of our businesses today, we need to have these resilience plans and strategies. And so making sure that we're getting these alerts. A lot of people in this LA fire, they've been caught out. They've literally, woken up to flames lapping against their windows. So as individuals and as businesses, we need to be hooked up to the right alert systems. We need to ensure that we are on track of when and how we're going to be impacted. As a business, we need to then manage our employees, ensure that they're safe, but then also communicate to our customers and partners whether we're operating or whether we're going to be shut down. And this is going to have, significant knock-on impacts. This is where we can really leverage the power of social media, both in terms of those updates and communicating out. And I think there's a huge opportunity for businesses, because the businesses that can keep the power on and can provide a community resilience center actually really build a huge amount of credibility, brand awareness, support for their community. If people can come to their facility, get power, get water, get shelter, that's massive.
And there's a phenomenal example of that in Texas. H-E-B, the grocery store chain in Texas, has really embraced this as being a community hub and being a place where customers can come, get critical supplies, get water, charge their phones, and they have deployed microgrids at these facilities to be just that, along with all the other benefits that we talk about.
Yeah, and then certainly for us as individuals, we need to have outage kits, making sure we've got the water, the medical supplies, batteries to charge, cell phones and things like that. But for businesses, it's the same. What are the key pieces of equipment that you'd want to remove in the event of an emergency or protect? And then a lot of our customers have perishable products. And, they ideally are protecting that through an on-site energy system. But if they're not, what are you going to do with that perishable product to protect it? Can you give it away? Can you donate it? How do you ensure that it's not completely wasted? And then ultimately, it's all about having this alternative energy strategy. No longer can we rely solely on one provider of power when that provider is relying on outdated and vulnerable infrastructure. And I think the key to this is really assessing what are our power needs and then what system is right for us. There's lots of technology options out there. It can be overwhelming, but as we continue to talk about it, it's easier than people think, because now we've got the power of technology, we've got the power of experience, and we can combine these technologies to drive really cost-effective, resilient outcomes such that businesses can use this truly as an insurance premium. This is the cheapest and most profitable insurance investment we'll ever make.
Yeah.
Most insurance payments are going into something that we never use, and it feels like it's dead money. Whereas investing in an on-site energy system, not only does it make you money when you don't need it by reducing your costs and providing emission reduction, when you do need it, it keeps the power on and it avoids those power outage costs we just talked about, like $100,000 an hour at the low end. Like, that's huge. And that very quickly pays for these on-site energy systems.
Yeah. And I'm feeling it on a personal level right now. I know I've shared with you over the last couple of days, but I try to breathe what we do. I've got a pretty sizable solar array at my own house, but I'm not feeling like I'm protected and resilient because I don't have a battery system. And so on a personal note, that's been something that's been top of mind as I've been getting alerts for the potential for public safety power shutoffs with these, high Santa Ana winds that we're experiencing here. And so and that's just, again, on a family level, then amplify that as we look to our businesses and the knock-on impacts of that. So my heart, our heart goes out to everybody that's been directly impacted by these wildfires. I think I was going to say that have been impacted, but I think there's not a single person in California or Southern California that's not, in some way impacted by these, and knowing someone or just being concerned about their own communities being affected. And there's a lot of work to be done. But I think the key takeaway here is that I think your point is well made that these are disasters, but we cannot be shocked by them anymore. They are going to continue to become an expected part of us moving forward. But rather than kind of reel from these and not do anything about it, how can we actually adapt to the changing weather patterns, adapt to the changing climate, ensure that our businesses and our families and our lives can continue. We'll see LA and the specific areas, parts of LA that are directly impacted by this, rebuild even stronger. But this is a particularly timely episode, one that hits close to home, and I'm more and more proud every day for the work that we're doing to both decarbonize the energy system, but also make it a much more resilient one.
Yeah. And the wonderful thing about these systems is they're modular. And so even if you're a business listening to this and you've installed solar, and to your point, you actually can't ride through an outage because you've got nowhere storing it, it's very easy to then bolt on a battery or expand your solar or add a gas turbine as backup power. So I think that's what we'd encourage everyone to think about. If you've got a clean slate, great. If you've done something, awesome. How do you make sure it actually truly helps you mitigate against these risks and position yourself for really future-proofing your operations? That's what it's about.
Exactly. Well, good to be back.
Yeah.
Happy 2025. We got a big year ahead.
Yeah, it's going to be massive. All right. Cheers.
See ya.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.